it's all based off of maritime and admiralty law.
Yeah, and so this is where the concept of studying how 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land, you've heard me say these statements. This is where those concepts come into place. Is admiralty is more of being a captain, right? What we call, I spent a lot of time with U.S. Military Marine Corps dealing with their shipping commissioners and fielding questions from their master sergeants about the protocols of moving, sequestering goods and acquisition and stuff and moving soldiers. Well, the same thing holds true with the ship's captain. He's in charge of the manifest, which are the goods aboard the ship. And those goods are, in most cases, they've made through the birth certificate system, made a chattel as goods.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I created the claim of the life system, where we claim our own lives and have to be accountable for what we do. And so I've built a financial system based upon where we don't have to be in that runaway society.
So let's connect those two. For the people that don't know what you've done or haven't seen your videos or things like that. So
yes,
looking through the frequently asked questions on your website, I came across one that really stood out to me that helped connect some dots. And that's when the birth certificate system was actually created, the country was in debt.
Yes.
And we didn't have the money to pay back the debt. Therefore, somebody took it upon themselves to use birth certificates as legal tender, so legal bank notes for the Federal Reserve as value against the national debt. So us as people, if we don't claim our life back in that way, because we didn't agree to that before we were born.
No.
And it's been thrust upon us to have a birth certificate with a number that's a legal banknote that is actual value against the national debt of the country.
Well, they've done much worse than that. So they've set up 8 channels, so to speak, which they can sell that, bundling your birth certificate into like a insurance underwriting policy, and they can trade it amongst themselves 24 hours a day. So they've made and then they put a bunch of zeros down on a computer screen somewhere, and then come through their gray screens and come through their agencies and their agents that are in the banks and are at the terminal heads through Langley mainly, right? Who are shot callers in what they called the seven grumpy old men system, which I took out, which was the protocols for entering Tier 1 banking system protocols. And so I disqualified the grammar for the 7 grumpy old men, and that's when the Department of Defense, the CIA, and the NSA pulled me off the streets to have a conversation with me about what that meant, because I found that the protocol to slide a corporate structure was fraudulent. And I restructured that through my global postal union, and they actually traversed with me in Bern, Switzerland on June 18th, 2003. And we had a meeting about what that meant, because I'd created for the first time in history of planet Earth, I'd created a new paradigm of jurisdiction called the now space.
And you did that only through particular contractual grammar?
Through contractual grammar and through setting up the fee freight for contract. What that means is the fee freight for your contract that most people don't comprehend is when they go to a courthouse, they file and pay a filing fee and get a file stamp on their contract. Well, the contracts worldwide were controlled by the post office, because in order to go to a courthouse, you have to show your ID, your transportation contract to move you into that foreign vessel in Drydock. And what I did is I restructured that through our claim of the life system, so they could not place us into that ship's channel to issue a Cusip number on the case to monetize the file stamp of that paperwork.
So how do you get access or authority or both to restructure that system?
Well, I was the first person in the history of mankind to come forward and realize that it was a shipping war authorized by the banking systems. The banking systems got their authorization from the post office for their central countries, who were under an umbrella corporation at the UPU. And I syntaxed their charter, and I was given access because I had studied the bankruptcies to get into the Benjamin Franklin bank books and trace the bankruptcy back to 1775.
And are those publicly available? Can anybody look at those and see that these bankruptcies happened?
That they see the forensics of it because it's a national security issue, the general public isn't allowed in the door. So that's a problem because the general public doesn't have the knowledge on how to walk in the door and present itself.
Yeah.
Because it's involved in usury, and the fiction like, oh, you're in usury, you're giving us no facts and you have no authorization to be here.
So let's go through some vocab real quick because a lot of people, including myself, don't know a lot of these terms. So we'll go through, what is usury? What does that mean?
Usury means that you're participating either with knowledge or without knowledge, that you're using a system. The system that we're typically get stuck with is the concept of showing your birth certificate to get into your elementary schools, to get your social security numbers, to get your driver's license. See, this is a usury. You're using that paperwork, your ship's papers, your vessel papers. You're using that to further yourself, to transport yourself from point A to point B, entering into the shipping war.
Through established systems.
Through an established former system.
Right.
Because I took it out worldwide for the citizens of the world in 2001 when I set up the Global Postal Union and set up the quantum banking system. Where I made the wrong is I had a business partner who was a counsel for the bad guys. And in that, me not knowing, right? So I was given access and doors would open for me to get into the world. Like, how does a guy from Wyoming, a reservation in Wyoming, Podunk, nowhere, get into the World Bank, get into the IMF, right? Get into the International Bank of Settlements, the World Court at The Hague, right? The United Nations. That's an impossible feat unless the doors were opened for me, right? And so I was given knowledge at the time, and I didn't when you don't know you're hanging out with the bad guys and you're doing things for the good, and you have, you love the spirit of the Constitution and what the founders really meant, not necessarily the words, but the condition of mind to create a freedom for we the people, the love of the armament, our freedoms. Those were things that I was compelled to take me on my journey.
So you believe that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the amendments, the way that was all written is soundly written?
Well, no, because the grammar was fraudulent. See, when you say independence, see, when I started breaking down the words, I became cognizant that I was in a trap.
So when those words were written, were they intentionally written?
Don't know. It wasn't there. See, this. You see what I'm saying? But you look at the history lines and the storylines of why they were doing this, right? They're separating from an oppressor, being England, who was suppressing their concepts of faith, their ideologies of having their arms, their freedoms of who they were, and they tried to separate from that. And you got to comprehend that if the bad guys are smart, which they were, right? And if you look at, how they set up taxation and all the things on a global level, the things they followed the British Crown did, back coming from, you could chase it all the way back to Babylon, the Sumerians, the Tartarians. There's a lot of people out here with a lot of different theologies on how that came about. But when I got into studying the prefixes of words, I became cognizant that paperwork was somehow, for whatever reason, I don't know, written in a negative content. And so I restructured that, and I was given access to the books of the bankruptcies through the Benjamin Franklin Post Office in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it gave me a different storyline of what actually happened in 1776. Right, because I had different access. I was given access to, if you watch the movie National Treasure and you see Nicolas Cage and he's up there and he pulls back the brick and pops out some glasses. Yeah, I've actually put those glasses on. Right, that's an actual thing.
No way.
Oh yeah, if you go to Liberty Hall, you go kitty corner across Liberty Hall, and you know the paces and you know the books, and you are with the right person in that secret society. That door opens for you. And I've actually looked through those glasses 100%.
Which secret society is that?
Now, that would be the secret society of the Illuminati.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that
yeah.
the same as the Masons?
Well, the Masons have their symbolisms on the brick, yes. But that's, you got to remember, the Masons is just a very new concept to the world, right? It's maybe 120, 200 years old. Those are stolen concepts from different doctrines.
Like from
and
the
different,
Knights Templar?
No, the way that's stolen as well. So you've got to take this thing way back, right? So you got to go back into the Sumerians and some of the text back then to see how some of these societies and some of this, they would call it esoteric knowledge or whatever they would call it, right? Where that came from.
So with, so we talked about usury a little bit with parse, syntax, grammar.
Yes.
Two questions about that. First of all, how do you define that? What is parse, syntax, grammar?
So parse is breaking down words and finding the root word of where it came from. Looking at the prefixes and the past tense suffixes. And the past tense suffixes are like an ed at the end of the word, like united.
Yeah.
Right? Ed moves you into the past. So does united have now time jurisdiction? No.
As in, for people who don't understand what that means, is does that apply
now?
Right now?
No. You're united, but united, ed, the suffix means to move you into a past tense scenario. So it moves you out of the quantum of the now. Now, the quantum is a breaking down of the quanta, which is the pluralisms that allowed everything to come to its least common denominator point to come to a conclusion about what the fact is now. And we're seeing that in the court systems now where the judges are following the protocol, doing a very good job. I trained them very well globally, where they're saying nobody's presenting any facts here. This is false and misleading. And so they're throwing out good people that probably have good volition to fix society. They're throwing out their lawsuits right and left under, well, you're not bringing any facts here, and everybody's confused because the judge is saying, well, in my court I do this, and they don't understand that they've set up foreign jurisdictions. They don't understand how the shipping war works to get into the place. And then the people that are filing the lawsuits were foolish enough to engage in usury and use file stamps on a court system that doesn't have authorization anymore. So it's a sad thing for me to sit back and watch as good people are spending their hard-earned equity to think that they're going to come to an outcome to go to a system that doesn't exist anymore. And so it's a harvesting mechanism against the people of planet Earth. It's a good financial business for those who are doing it, right? And it's unfortunately it keeps the citizen in bondage and tied back to their birth certificate position, back to your original word of usury, right? And this is what I've done is I've moved the goalpost, so to speak, and moved off of that past tense and future tense paradigm and placed everything to accountability on volition of now, where we don't have that negativity in our now space, where we're given the freedom to knit our own ties, our own communities, our own paradigms to help the planet, bring not angst or division into the theater, because now you can put the volition or the condition of mind on trial. So the quantum grammar allows us to finite, because you can use the prepositional phrase to create the fact. The facts were done in this way in the now space. Now, what is the condition of thinking to create that paradigm of thought? Did it create harm? Did you try to purposely vaccinate, or what did you put in the? So now you can start really finding out and claiming what's been done in the now space. And this is the value of the prepositional phrase grammar: is you preset the facts. Because the facts don't change. Facts are what they are. You can't put a fact on trial because a court can't try a fact. You can only try the condition of mind.
You're basically bringing the sovereignty back to the individual so that no system can have authority or control over a person?
Yes. The reason for the quantum system is that the quantum system does away with the banking systems.
Yeah.
Right? And brings the accountability, because there's so much abundance out here for all of us. Right? So I can take simple things that nobody, like literally just coming here, driving into Prescott, I'm driving through trillions of dollars worth of assets that I'm looking at as I'm driving. And literally I'm driving down the road and look at that cut, look at that cut, because I know what that means, and I know how to monetize that in a way that no one has to be broke.
What's an example of one of these assets you're referring to?
Like
something that you could
that I can put in
in a condition, a state that it multiplies forever. So how much rhodium do you need? How much gold do you need? How much? We don't have to tear up the earth to prove the perpetual energy of the value from one beaker of precipitant.
So you're talking about alchemizing material.
Well, there's no rule, and the NSA and the fumbling, bumbling idiots have raided my lab, so they know exactly what I'm talking about. I speak with authority. And they actually tried to charge me with being an alchemist.
Is that a crime?
There is no, that's the funny part. There's no crime because it's called knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? Once knowledge is a whole different paradigm. You can't. What I choose to do with the knowledge is very valuable. That's where I feel my strength is because I'm doing the best I can because I'm misunderstood by society, right? They don't comprehend because they haven't been down my rabbit trail, right? I'm the guy in a different rabbit trail than everyone else, down a different rabbit hole of figuring out what makes energy move, what makes the financial systems move on a global level. And I've restructured the global stock markets. I mean, you're talking about a guy with 30 years history of
studying this stuff.
Of restructuring the admiralty and maritime concepts of banking contracts and how the slavery of bondage has occurred to planet Earth.
So the entire world's system of money, the alleged system of money that currently operates, the way that the majority of people use that stuff, that is all established and functioning based off of improper parse syntax grammar. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that's how you're able to go into the contract of any kind of banking institution and say, this is wrong, and here's the correct grammar?
Yes.
So what is that correct parse syntax grammar even based on?
It's based on closure of what is trying to be done in contract. So each sentence can be written frontwards and backwards and means the same thing. So there's no subjective interpretation on what the value of words mean. So now you can go back to the people that are engaged in contract and they say, hey, you have this joinder here and here's your performance based upon your performance. Did the energy move or did you block it or did you steal it? And so this is how you weed out the theft.
So where does parse syntax grammar come from in the English language?
Well, parse is a French word. It means to break words down. Right? Communication is the capacity for you and I to have a intelligent comprehension of the words written down, not the spoken word. Because there's so much trickery in the spoken word because 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. Because you can't prove that in spoken word. Because you and I could say, I can ask you a question. Hey, Andy, does 2 + 2 equal 4?
I would say yes.
Does TO + TOO equal FORE?
No.
See, so what I'm showing you here is that it has to be written down.
So it's 100% phonetic based.
Correct. It's based upon written word, not spoken word, because you can't prove spoken word because it's subjective interpretation on your perspective of knowledge based upon your experiences, what you know based upon what you witness. And it's only your ability to witness that you can have comprehension of something being done.
I'm going to need to re-listen to this. Mm-hmm. So how did parse syntax grammar in English originate? Where did the language, the structuring come from that you're referring to that overwrites these banking systems contracts?
Great question. So my ex-partner and I, David Eifenwinkler-Miller, who is dead, and he was a bad guy, right? And if you watch his videos, he's very articulate. I'm here to educate the top 1% of the 1% of the world. And I'd be looking at him, I'm like, well, that's not where I live. That's not my space.
Yeah.
I'm friends with my society. I'm friends with my community. I love my hunting and fishing and playing basketball and hanging out with my friends. And I like to dance and I like to hang out, right? So that to me, that never computed. And as it got further down the road, as he failed in his performances to comply with contract, he locked himself away from the systems that we were building. So he weeded himself out through natural selection of his choice to not comply with contracts that he engaged in. So the federal government because I was involved in the largest court-martialing in the history of planet Earth, the court-martialing of the U.S. Pentagon from December 12th, 2012, all the way through this now space. The federal government saw what was going on, the U.S. Marshal Service, and they were like, because they kept telling me, you're talking to a guy here that's been in a lot of battles, right? I've been in the courtrooms more than anybody anybody you see on TV. That's all BS. You're talking to the man, for a fact, right? And they know it, right? I've trained them, and it's kind of like training a dog. You had to show them.
And do it again and again.
And then they got it, right? The U.S. Marshal Service and the federal judicial system, the DOJ, one of their main complaints was David was a habitual liar. Couldn't tell the truth. Couldn't do what he said, didn't do what he said. And so when I became Chief Judge at the U.S. Supreme Court in October of 2004, the U.S. Marshal Service pulled me off to the side and they said, "Hey, Russell," and I said, we got videos out here. David saying he's Chief Judge of the U.S. Supreme Court. Was he there? I'm like, "Well, you guys saw the videos. You think he was there?" And I said, "No, he wasn't there. He's full of shit." I said, "He's been kicked out of the quantum system based upon shareholder terms that he agreed to, and he was moved out of the system." And so they devised up a plan, and they dropped me into the state of Michigan in 2007 on trumped-up nothing charges to bring him and I into the well of the court, into the neutral position of the court. And you've got to comprehend, courtrooms are neutral worldwide, which means that it's controlled by the law of the flag because the flag regulates contract. David and I filed for the copyrights on the Title IV, Sections 1, 2, and 3 flag, and I filed for the Civil Peace flag in 2007. David was not part of that one, which was the customs flag that you see a lot of organizations trying to use. They didn't ask my permission. You got to comprehend, a lot of these groups out here that you see sprung up all over the place, they're very new since COVID into trying to figure out what's going on.
So how do you file for the copyright of a flag?
I filed at the U.S. Post Office, and then I walked it into the U.S. Pentagon and walked it into the Secretary of the Navy's office as a prize master and prize commissioner because they were in charge of flag etiquette for foreign vessels moving offshore. And so it came under the Secretary of Navy's office and the United Nations. When I got to the United Nations in 2003, I met with 86 ambassadors who called me back. Some of them called me back, like Israel, over 26 times to have a conversation about my quantum banking system, my crypto-currencies, and the things that I built.
For the average person living in this country, I mean, you're hearing this stuff and you're thinking, okay, you were able to seize the copyright of the American flag?
Yeah, because the United States was coming out of bankruptcy, and I was the only person with the claim that the birth certificate system ended. And so now you have all these people out here that are walking derelict without papers because their birth certificates, they don't have the authorization to state a claim anymore because that system, which was under the post office, vacated the Constitution in the November 7th, 2000 election. When they vacated the Constitution, which were the guidelines to elect a president, they had to vacate the trustee of the of the bankruptcy.
Who's the trustee?
It was the President of the United States. So they had to vacate the estate of that.
And this is all based on loan.
This is all based on loan of 1775.
So the trustee, so this has been an active loan since 1775?
They didn't appoint the president until the Treaty of Versailles, until we entered it.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning because we got before we're a country. You have if I remember from your videos correctly, you have Ben Franklin, who is working for the French, and in order to start this country
and England, what they were doing is they were setting up the sea lanes for merchants to engage in commerce because everything was commercial venture. And so free venture capitalists were running around the world saying, "Hey, we got goods, we need to move them."
This is England and France trying to do this?
Everybody, all kinds of nations, right? Not just the U.S., but China. I mean, every nation was a seafaring position because they were exchanging their goods. Some countries could grow one thing, another country didn't. Supply and demand, they wanted things, and they would engage in trade. And so this is what they were doing, was setting up the nautical routes to set up ports to bring in goods. Benjamin Franklin was Postmaster General also of Canada. Most people don't know that.
Of Canada?
Yeah, Canada came out of international bankruptcy and it ceased to exist as a corporation on April 17th, 2017. We rewrote a constitution up in Canada, filed copyrights on that with the Canadian citizens, and that specific date, all the bonds transferred out of the country through the Bank of Canada to the Bank of Scotland. And the British Crown announced that their Prince Philip, who was in charge of the bankruptcy note, was going to go into retirement, would no longer be in public speaking. So that's how the financial transfer happened for the payout and the slide in of the martial law system up in Canada. And Canada is a really nasty place with very tyrannical.
We can see that today. With Trudeau and all that stuff he's doing.
For sure. Yeah. And the Canadian citizens are very kind, and they don't have what we have been given here. And we have good patriots here that still hold on to their armament, right? They are their last line of defense because ain't no one coming to help.
And the first line of defense.
It's the last, the first. Draw the line in the sand, grow it set, and stand your ground.
Yeah.
And come together as communities, because that's where the quantum grammar comes into place. To set up communities to where we move outside the jurisdictional guidelines of the fraudulent system. But back when David and I came to court under the law of the flag, because this is very crucial, the clerk of court had, because she works for the post office, and the post office works for the UPU out of Switzerland. So she literally had all of David and my treaties on her desk stacked up, because we were ship owners of the neutral, we claim the land of our land to be in the now space of the courtroom during time of contract.
And the land you're referring to is what?
The courtrooms worldwide.
Okay, because they're neutral.
Because they're neutral. If you're divorced here in Prescott and you and your wife show up in Hong Kong, are you still divorced?
Oh.
Yeah, you are, right? Because there's a file stamp on there, otherwise known as the post office, the New World Order, making sure that there's a world order to make sure that there's world order, right? So now
okay.
So
I see where you're going.
Yeah.
So what did Ben Franklin do to get a loan to start the corporation of the United States rather than a country?
Well, no, he set up the post office in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania. And he also set up borrowing money because he needed to move delegates into who's going to pay, who's going to finance this thing. So we had to set up the venue. So they set the venue, Liberty Hall. And have you ever been to Liberty Hall?
No.
Oh, fascinating place. You need to go, but you need to go kitty corner, like right in the back. It would be southeast, just very kitty corner, about 50 feet, and go up the stairs there. There'd be gates there, but go around them gates. And you'll get up to the top there, and you go off to the right, and you find the brick with the Masonic, the compass and the Masonic symbol on there for the lodge, and pull that off and flip out the glasses and take a look for yourself. Pretty wild stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, pretty wild stuff. Anyway, so we get back to the trial in Michigan, and one of it was a very articulated. So it was the first time a guy who was a very nasty attorney general, or deputy attorney general for state of Michigan, Donald Davis. First time he lost a case, right? I beat him, right? Never lost a case. And these are very arrogant people. And I'd already taken out the U.S. Supreme Court and was pulled off by the U.S. Marshals during that time frame, as well as a vice admiral for the Department of Navy. He met me in Oklahoma, and they wanted to talk to me about having me give them orders through the U.S. Marshal Service to the Pentagon for the upcoming case that I was going to. And the Pentagon was so happy that they were going to put me, someone was going to try me out, because, I'd been smashing them to stop the wars and stop the nonsense in Iraq and Afghanistan.
So everything that's developed underneath the global banking financial system operates under the same improper grammar, is what you're saying?
Yes.
So any institution, federal government, all the things below
Yeah,
it.
well, if you say state of Arizona, of is a preposition, but it lacks the article to command the authority of the noun. So
will you say that again?
Of is a preposition, but it lacks the authority. But what follows a preposition? An article, right? Which now sets the fact.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
When you take out the article, now the preposition becomes a modifier. Modification creates change. Change creates motion. A motion creates action. And action creates verb. So can you show me the geographic location verb Arizona?
No.
Oh, so you've just found fraud in your own contracts, right? So everything was placed under modification to create subjective interpretation to allow somebody else to control your world.
Mm-hmm.
That way they can define it for you, because you could never define your fact, because you could never find yourself. And if you don't know who you are, you're going to have to be locked up, because you're in nonsense, otherwise known as lunacy. And that's what I got the World Bank and the IMF on, was lunacy, because they were using subjective interpretation under adjectives and pronouns. So I could make international mean a duck, or I could change my mind and make it be a cup, or I could change my mind to any theater I want, because they did not claim a value, because there was no claim to the adjective. Same thing with the World Bank, International Bank of Settlements, United Nations. United Nations, the head of the United Nations Postal Administration actually told me flat out, the United Nations is a fraudulent grammar organization with no authorization to exist. But the people of the world are stupid, Russ.
So if David-Wynn-Miller didn't create this language structure...
He was part of it, yes. He was a joint partner.
So if that didn't happen, then none of this would exist.
Correct.
So how did he create a language structure? What is it based on? Is it based on the grammar of the English language?
It's based on a mathematical function of 1 + 2 = 3, 3 - 2 = 1. And it's adding value under a numerical cipher to create a frontwards and backwards system. That's what he created. And what I created for that is I brought the quantum, the mathematics of the quantum to that situation, which was an easy partnership for us, because he had one aspect, I had the other, and then we just joined. And first thing protocol we looked at is, hey, what sets up a country? Well, of course, the flag, right? Because if you don't have a flag, you can't set up a venue. And
right.
so we went for the flag.
So what he established was a parallel.
No, he didn't know about parallel.
I don't know what you mean by parallel in this instance.
He didn't know about anything about spatial cognition. What he knew about was
math.
Took a prepositional phrase to make a noun. And he was a great mathematician. He owns a lot of copyrights and a lot of polymer technology for plastics.
So he reoriented the entire English language based on mathematics?
Him and I did. Yeah, we spent...
okay, that's the part that is kind of missing.
Yeah, we did about I'm up to about 300,000 hours study time in that right now, of studying all kinds of concepts of hieroglyphics of communication skills. Well, I just went into old dictionaries all over the world and kind of pieced it together. So I had dictionaries from the 1400s, 1300s.
Well, how do you match it to mathematics? I'm trying to understand.
Well, we use the prepositional phrase. So what comes, just like we talked about with Arizona, with and the article, that's how we did it. So we made everything a fact. And so we were the first people to put facts on contracts.
So if the average guy claims his life back, driving around, we talked about this a little bit, gets pulled over and doesn't have their ID because it's a fraudulent ID, so they can't claim that they are that person if the entire system that creates that ID is fraudulent. What do you do? Because cops probably don't know.
No. So here, we do something a little bit different. We don't bash the system. We join the system and stop and correct. So we take our claims of the life and we file it with the Departments of Transportation, with the state departments, and we reauthorize our life as a fact. So when they pull us over, they have everybody's allowed dual citizenship, right? So now you're sitting there in a dual citizenship, and the fact has jurisdiction over the fiction because he can prove it.
Yeah.
But you have to display good volition. And you don't be a dick to the cops.
Right.
Right? Be cool. Look, some are dirty, some aren't dirty. Those are facts.
Yeah.
Right. Those are facts.
That's for sure.
But before you're judgmental of a sheriff or a cop, give them the benefit of the doubt. Consider where they're at. Right? They're trying to make a living. They're trying to survive. They're upset about the world. They're stuck in red tape policies that they can't get out of. By filing with the DOTs and the different agencies of their usuries for papers or credentials, we are setting up a neutral port during times of martial law. So it's a neutral. You're coming in more of as a neutral, as a non-combatant in a world of strife and division. So we take a much more different approach on fairness to the officer, as well as fairness to yourself, to create a platform based upon your knowledge in the theater, because everything's knowledge-based, right? So people come to our confabs or our workshops, and they get the necessary knowledge, and they get pulled over. And, we had guys up here, Scott, I don't know, guy up here, and he gets pulled over, and he'd filed his claim of the life, and what's the first thing the Yavapai County asks him? What is this? Are you a sovereign citizen? And Scott's like, no, man, that's an oxymoron. Oh, great, you're not a sovereign citizen. Perfect. And so people, you have to have couth and grace and be kind to people. So we have a different message for those that are out using our system. Don't be angry. Be nice. Be kind. Give full closure. Be truthful. Be honest with them. They can get into their computer systems. I restructured and rewrote Interpol's constitution over in Lyon, France, and had a face-to-face meeting with the head of Interpol, as well as the head deputy director of the United States for Interpol in France on June 12, 2003, where Interpol is part of the networking system of the 7 grumpy old men who set up the computer programming for what they see on their computer screens globally. So there's a system in place, and 99% of the time, if you are fair and you're not doing something that is a public safety hazard, right? You're not drinking and driving, or you're not acting like a clown out here, you're let go. Right? If they stop and correct, we don't understand this, but we don't want the problems. Hey, please be accountable for, it's about being accountable. It's not about getting away with something. It's about being accountable and fair with people. So we have a little bit different style. We're not out here driving without their license plates. We're not doing any of that. We stopped and corrected, and we have our car titles, and we're postmasters on the contracts. We're always in a position of being a postmaster as a neutral during a war theater. And the war theater is occurring in every state, because in every state, on top of every state flag, is a spire. And what's up on top of the flag standard sets the jurisdiction for the theater. So what that means is to suspend state constitutions, because the spire's on top of the state flag, which means they're in a state of war, right? So you have to comprehend where you're at in time and space, or you're going to get lost, right? And so those are some of the conversations that you can have with the police officers or the sheriffs out in the theater if you do get pulled over, right? More of an educational position, right? There's a number of things that we do to set up a safety network so that those that have claims of life are not getting harvested.
Yeah. So what about judges? How many judges know that they're in neutral ground, or that what they're doing is fraudulent?
Well, yes. In the federal judicial system, when you get through federal judicial school and become a federal judge, you get a hat. And the hat says, if no one's talking, everyone's walking, which means the opposite. Get them talking so they don't walk. It's a collection agency. If they get on their judge's Lexus and they do the necessary homework, and they study in the federal level, they study Federal Rules Civil Procedure 44.1, which is he court, not jury, which is an adverb statement. And those that have watched my videos, I was working with a guy in 1997 out of the Federal Judge Institute for Internal Affairs named Alfred Manin. So I was given secrets. I was getting secrets. You got to comprehend, the federal judicial system, I made them, but they made me. Right? I gave them what they're supposed to do, and they do it, and they're doing a great job harvesting the people. It's fabulous, right? No one's using facts. You all get harvested. Right? That's just how it is, because no one has proved that they're accountable for their actions. Unfortunately, the bad guys are using this, not telling its general public, not telling society. Yeah. And these were the battles that I was fighting back when I was dealing with the IMF agents and all the things back in 2001,
All judges,
Right.
you mentioned federal judges know this stuff.
Oh, yes.
Are all judges not federal judges? They're state level judges?
No,
Is that what I understand?
well, everything's federal because from your local city court, what do they ask you for? They ask you for Federal Reserve notes for money. So everything is classified under federal, under martial law, and they're just the lower levels are a little bit more difficult because the education's not as high.
Okay.
So you have to go slower and you have to really re-educate. Every single judge that I was dealing with back in 1995 to 2000 is either a state appeals court judge or federal appeals court judge now. And all attorneys in all court cases are also state and federal attorneys, right, or judges right now in every jurisdiction that I'd been in, because I gave them the secrets on what it took to be a judge. So, well, they learned because they were watching a judge go through the courtroom. That'd be me.
So it's possible that I go into a courtroom and these judges don't know what's going on, and I have
Correct.
to re-educate
Well,
them on this stuff.
Yeah, you tell them to go to their judge's Lexus and look up the quantum banking system and Russell-J. Colin Gold, Postmaster General, Commander-in-Chief, and Chief Judge of the United States, Chief Judge of the World Court at The Hague. So I've been a lot of places and got through a lot of doors with these concepts of grammar to set up a new jurisdiction.
And going back to the one thing that's like the missing link for me is how and why do these people abide by this new form of grammar
Well, they don't technically exist.
based on that form of grammar?
Yeah, they're not actually there. So a lot of times I'd go to court and I'd be saying, I'm going to speak to myself in a first person specific because I know none of you exist. Now, you talk about an energy move when you disarm them from the very essence of being in a space. Yes, they get a little mad at first, and they got a little testy. But once they thought about it and really studied what was being articulated, because I've taken this to such a global level and galactic level that you can't say that I didn't walk through the doors because too many people know about it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's for me and for the citizens now coming in, there's such an education level that's been placed in place for the last 30 years. You got to comprehend. I've been doing this 30 years, Andy. Mm-hmm. There's a huge education and a lot of doors I've been through.
I have no doubt that you understand it and that the people that you've instructed understand it.
Yes.
But coming from the outside, people that don't get the privilege to talk to you.
Very difficult.
Yes. It takes so much focus and attention to try and understand it.
Oh, yeah. Especially when you start studying prefixes to words. Yeah. Right? All of a sudden, you look at yourself, and most people go down to the bank and do a deposit. Right? But the prefix DE means to separate from your posit or your position. Then the bank turns around and hands you a receipt. But the prefix re means no. So they give you nothing back, which now gives a third party access to your account because you can't prove you had funds
Which is why they can loan it out at their own will.
Correct. Everything is semantics. Everything is communication and our ability to control our words. And once you comprehend that you are in a shipping communication war, and you look at the math functions of being in the quantum of the now space, well, it's a no-brainer. Right? Why would you want to use past tense suffixes? Why would you want to move yourself out of time and space?
So why do these shipping entities or nations or whoever it is that's shipping goods, why do they abide by admiralty or maritime law?
It's how they control the directionals of the goods. To who gets what, how they cut off what.
Well, it's like the Geneva Convention, right?
Yeah, I rewrote that.
Nations at war, they abide by this convention. Like, we're going to kill you, but we're only going to do it in certain ways.
Hey, I got a question for you guys. You've been in the military. Tell me, what rules are there in a fight? There ain't none.
The only rule in the fight is win the fight. When it really comes down to it.
When it comes down to it, it is your will being forced. How do you control your willpower? Do you give up? Can you pick yourself off the ground? Do you fight at all odds? But to me, it comes down to what are the principles on which you choose to fight? Mm-hmm. Are you using a principle based upon your capacity to get full closure to put you into the theater of a fight? Because fighting and war is the last resort when communication barriers have broken down. Right? So this is where the math interface, where we can come in, or I can come in, and put needs on the table of nations of people and quantumize them to bring fairness so everybody gets what they want. Because it's not a money thing anymore because I can give them whatever they want. Right? How much wealth do you need? How much is enough? Right? How much? But
You don't want to give it to the governments.
Right.
You want to give it to the people.
Yeah.
Right? The hell with them governments. They're not doing a damn thing to help the people. The hell with them Congress members. They ain't doing. U.S. Congress has no authorization. In the military court-martialing of the U.S. Pentagon, I filed a passing bill through both the House and Senate that they put their stamps on the back and filed it in the Federal Register for me, shutting down the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress.
Is this publicly available?
I'm trying to be nice right now to them. I did go to Mar-a-Lago, sit down with U.S. Secret Service and Trump attorneys on August 13th, 2001. They're very compartmentalized, very dumbed down. Trump's very new into the theater, and he's very compartmentalized on what the military gives him access to. And so when you see that, and we see some of the games that they played against him, like if you take the Space Force logo and you flip it upside down, it's the symbol of Baphomet, right? And so when you,
Dude, I noticed that.
yeah, yeah. So there's different energies going on with these guys.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be judgmental on Trump because I never had a conversation with him, but it is what it is, people. And that's a whole nother thing. But I can't be judgmental. Very compartmentalized on knowledge. They were his attorneys were really upset about me and being chief judge at the U.S. Supreme Court. I did 2.5 hours with them and showed them all the forensic of me being the chief judge, and they were like, "How come we didn't know this?" I says, "Well, because you don't actually think there'd be a president, do you? This is all nonsense. That ended in the year 2000. You guys are out of your freaking minds. There's no guidelines to elect a president. That's why they can slip all the machines in. That's why they can do what they can do." I says, I disqualified and took out the Federal Elections Commission, filed that through the U.S. Supreme Court as chief judge.
And that's available to read?
Yeah, I'll give you access to that for sure. It's on my websites, and some of the things are on my websites.
Okay.
Yeah, so they know what's up, So you can't be judgmental against these people.
Yeah.
There are no presidential elections because of the martial law. This is all a fable, and people just have to clue themselves in. They're going to have to figure out how to toughen up and handle the feds. And that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
I give you my word on that.
Well, up till now, I haven't gone onto my notes at all. I have 7 pages of notes, so I'm gonna go through these because it's possible I'll forget something.
Yeah. Hey,
talk about.
Have you comprehended everything I've said so far?
To be honest, no. But I think it's because you're talking fast, and I don't have the time to process new concepts at that speed.
Oh,
That's the only reason. So if I go back through and listen to it slower, I'll be able to break it down.
yeah. You might have to do some editing and all those things. I don't know.
Yeah.
Your audience is your audience, and everybody's going to take and retain what they can.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to be judgmental against anything. I just thank you and your audience for the chance to come on.
Oh,
because I don't get the chance to come on too much anymore. They got me froze out of the system.
Well, thank you for doing it.
Yeah.
I was first of all, like, when I first saw you in there, I was so stoked. I was like, oh my God, that's him. No way. I got to talk to this guy. So I immediately passed off my child to someone to hold and was like, I'm going to go talk to him.
Yeah.
And you agreed to do it. So I was like, wow, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm fair with people. People don't comprehend me. And they, because of the undermining behind what I've done by the CIA, I'm not allowed out on the airways a whole lot.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because nowadays you look at like so-called conspiracies or conspiracy theories.
Yeah, but I'm not a conspiracy. It's facts.
Well, that's the thing. But people see the first layer of information and they either hold on to it, look deeper, or dismiss it. Mm-hmm. And most people just dismiss most things because you can't trust what you're seeing nowadays.
Correct.
So you don't have any reason to look into anything.
Yeah. See, this is the difference between me and what you see out here is I went and did everything I said. Yeah. And that's really, and that was the one thing. So in the year 2003, I was involved in a very physical case, that case that I was starved down in, and they brought in the U.S. Department of Military psychologists into the location to do a psych eval on me on what I had done to the Pentagon, what I had done for the flag, and what I had done for the country.
Because they're trying to understand it.
Yeah, well,
They don't know.
yeah, and then that was the all three of the psychologists from the Department of Navy, which, by the way, gave me a medical record for the Department of Navy as a muster master, commander in chief, and postmaster general. They came to the conclusion that I was actually telling the truth, and they had followed me all around, and they had pictures of me in different banks around Europe. Banks at the Vatican. They had pictures of me all over the world saying, "This is you." I says, "Yeah, that's me." They says, "But you actually did everything you said." I'm like, Yeah.
They're not used to that.
Yeah, they weren't used to it.
Yeah.
They weren't physically used to it. They're like, but this changes everything. I says, yeah. I says that I'm trying to help my mankind. I says that Iraq war and what you guys have done at 9/11. Shame on those people. Shame on. And then why did we rush off? Why did the soldiers not take a minute to decompress, study, learn about the facets of what the hell's going on, and regroup about, hey, before we enter in and destroy people's lives and destroy our lives and collect all the carnage, because going to war is the last resort, right? This is not, let's communicate first. Let's open the lines of communication.